So this talk that I'm giving, it was originally a paper I wrote on my MLit, and it's something I'm trying to develop and make a little bit better. I don't know how much work I've been able to do on that yet, so this is very much still like a work in progress, and any feedback is very much appreciated. But yeah, so it's called Feeling and Knowing the Grip of Dispositional Desire. It basically centres on this puzzle that was proposed by Peterson in his 2017 paper, and it's one of those classic puzzles of here are three independently plausible but jointly inconsistent propositions. So number one, we've got all desires are dispositional mental states. Number two, we have privileged access to at least some of our desires. And number three, we do not have privileged access to any dispositional mental state. So obviously because of that third one, they are inconsistent. So Peterson wants to deny one. I am going to say that doesn't work, and instead we should deny number three. So this is just a roadmap of what I'm going to cover. I haven't actually timed this talk yet, so I'm hoping it will fit in time, but I'll keep an eye on the clock and just wave at me if I'm going way over. So I'm going to start off just by motivating the puzzle. So I'm going to kind of show you a bit about why each one of those propositions is plausible. Obviously there'll be more that could be said, but I'll just give you a sense of it. I'll show you Peterson's solution, then I'll show you the problems with that, then I'll show you my solution, and then kind of just ask you if it works, because I don't really know yet. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So, let's start with the first proposition, which is that all desires are dispositional mental states. So there are different ways you can define desire as a dispositional mental state. This is the one that Peterson works with, so I am just going to stick with that. Obviously there are other ones available, but essentially it's for an agent, why do I put for an agent S? Agent A it's meant to be, or subject S, that's bad. For an agent S, the desire that P is for it to be the case that under certain conditions, C, S will phi, where phi is a mental event, behaviour or action that aims to bring about the P. So P is just the proposition in this case, and yeah, this part is what we call the manifestation of the desire. So it's basically, you can only manifest, or desires can only be manifested under certain conditions. So that's what phi is, and then the conditions are what you might call the trigger for that. So here's an example with a different type of dispositional state. So the vase is fragile, and the cat has triggered the conditions for the fragility to be manifested. So why should we believe that all desires are dispositional states? I'll preface this by saying this is quite a consensus view, if I'm right, in the literature at the moment. Essentially, desires are characterised by their role in motivating action, but obviously they can only do this under certain conditions. That's why it's useful to cash it out in terms of a disposition. And it seems like we can possess desires without currently desiring. So there is, I suppose, something it might be like to desire. We might associate it with a feeling of attraction or a feeling of pleasure, but it feels like we can still have desires without that phenomenology at the surface. Think about more long-term desires, like I desire to have a career in philosophy, or it's not like that's currently sitting in my brain the entire time, but it still makes sense to talk about it as a desire, I think. So here's a quick clarification. I like to eat cake, but do I always desire to eat cake? That is me, by the way. It doesn't seem like I always desire to eat cake. At least for me, this isn't going to be true of everyone, but at least for me, I only seem to desire to eat, I put chocolate. I couldn't decide whether it was going to be chocolate or cake, so you've got both. I only desire to eat chocolate cake when I'm hungry. But unless we say a little bit more about our definition, it seems like I could always desire to eat cake, because Evie desires to eat cake if it's the case that under certain conditions she will phi, where phi is a mental event, behaviour, action that aims to bring about my eating of cake. So without anything stopping me, I could just plug in my being hungry as one of these conditions. But it's always true that when I'm hungry, I will act in ways to bring about my eating of cake. So it seems like I always desire to eat cake. To kind of avoid this, I want to just make a distinction between what I call constitutive conditions on the one hand. These are conditions that once they're met, they make the manifestation of desire possible, but not guaranteed. So consider a vase being made of porcelain. It's not just the vase's breaking that's conditional on it being made of porcelain, the very fragility of the vase. So a vase isn't fragile unless it's made of porcelain. It also won't break unless it's made of porcelain, but the fragility comes first. And the same goes for desire. So it's not just my acting in ways to bring about my eating of cake that's conditional on being hungry, but my very desire to eat cake is conditional on me being hungry. So I haven't really figured this bit out yet. These conditions seem to be more to do with intrinsic properties, but I haven't really sussed that out yet. And then on the other hand, we have operational conditions. So these are conditions that make manifestation guaranteed so long as the other conditions have fallen into place. So there will be lots of operational conditions, and once they all cooperate together, manifestation will happen. So again, these seem to focus more on extrinsic properties, but probably not always. In this example, the cat leaping off the vase is something that has to happen in order for the vase to break and for the fragility to be manifest. And in the cake situation, it's being near cake, having someone who's able to buy cake. And there are other types of conditions that people might call non-interference conditions, as in there's nothing that gets in the way. These are probably different conditions, but for the purposes of this, I'm just going to stick them under the same category, insofar as they're distinct from constitutive conditions. So just to clarify that, whether or not I possess the dispositional desire to eat cake depends on whether the constitutive conditions are met, and whether or not my desire to eat cake is manifested depends on whether the operational conditions are met. So that was just a little tangent. Back to the second proposition. We have privileged access to at least some of our desires. So we need to know what privileged access is. Here's the definition again, the one that Peterson's working with. An agent S has privileged... Agent S, what am I doing? An agent S has a privileged access to F if and only if one, S knows F in a highly epistemically secure way, and B, S arrives at this knowledge by way of a uniquely first personal means. So again, we want to figure out what these two things mean. So what's highly epistemically secure? It's approaching epistemic certainty. This obviously needs to be a little bit more spelled out, but for the purposes of this discussion, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to leave that a little bit underdefined for now. What's more important is the uniquely first personal means. So this is a bit easier to explain with kind of a bit of an example. So after finishing my run at the gym, I feel thirsty. Only I have access to this feeling of thirst, and this feeling is all I need to gain this highly epistemically secure knowledge that I desire water. People could gain that knowledge in other ways, just because we know what happens when people run, etc. But that's not a uniquely first personal means. Only I am in a situation to get that knowledge purely from my phenomenology. So here's the conflict. Third claim, we do not have privileged access to any dispositional states. I'm still sort of figuring out where this view comes from. For me, it just seems to me the least immediately yeah, sure. But here's one view, one defense of it from Gertler in 2011. She claims that in order to know that you're in a dispositional state of desire, you need to know that you would act in ways to bring about the content of that desire under certain conditions. So you need to know sometimes quite a complicated counterfactual. So although I experience the feeling of thirst after my run, this isn't enough to provide me with the highly epistemically secure knowledge that I would act in ways to seek out water in certain conditions. And the reason for this is because I also need to use inferences based on how I've behaved in the past. I can't not use them to get to that highly epistemically secure knowledge, and that means that the process is no longer a uniquely first personal means. I think by uniquely first person they mean like the first person experience has to be alone enough to get the highly epistemically secure knowledge. And she also adds it's just not obvious that knowledge of a complex counterfactual could be highly epistemically secure in the same way as knowledge of like a phenomenal state could be. So here they are all laid out again. Peterson wants to deny number 1, and he says it's false because some desires are occurrent states. So he doesn't say that they're all occurrent states, he just says some of them are, and that's all you need to deny that claim. To make this argument, he builds upon Lawler's idea that you can gain privileged access to these desires via internal promptings such as like phenomenal states, like the feelings of thirst and like the feeling of attracting, like being attracted to something. He calls these like states that we get in, these occurrent states, PM states. Or she might call them that, I'm not sure who did it first, but one of them did. So in the case of desire, this is just a feeling of attraction, pleasure, whatever adjective you want to insert there. And as well as being manifestations of the underlying desire, he says that these PM states are in and of themselves occurrent desire states. So, and he says, well, the reason they're desire states is because we think of desires as being mental states that bring about the content, that motivate bringing about the object of the desire, and PM states do this, so they are desires. So yes, and there is another benefit to this view, a small benefit, because obviously he is going against quite a consensus here that like all desires are dispositional states. It does help us make sense of the idea that there is a phenomenology to desire and there's something it's like to be in a state of desire, whereas it doesn't seem like a dispositional state itself has phenomenology. So that's a benefit to the view, potentially. Here are the problems that I see with the solution. Think of an analogy with belief. So we often will talk about different ways of believing things. You can dispositionally believe something or occurrently believe something. Here's an example from Bartlett. Consider, for example, the proposition that cats have whiskers. Now that I've mentioned that proposition, your belief in it is occurrent, but you've believed it continuously for decades in the non-occurrent sense. I think it's odd to say that that instance of occurrent belief is a belief in addition to the dispositional belief, which is essentially what Peterson's claiming. He's saying you have these occurrent desires as well as your dispositional desires. I think we distinguish between beliefs. We count beliefs on the basis of their propositional content, not on the basis of how we relate to them and our having of them. I think you can talk about believing versus stable belief, and you can believe things lots of different times and in lots of different ways, but the belief itself is the same. And yes, the same applies to desire. There is a benefit to rejecting Peterson's view, because if you do endorse it, you kind of can no longer talk about suppressing a desire, because my desire to eat cake that I experience when I step into a cafe and look at all their options, it seems like that should be the same desire I was able to suppress earlier on the walk. So it seems like there is something to like an achievement of like suppressing a desire, and then there's something about it, that desire coming to life. Whereas for Peterson, those are two different desires. So it's a metaphysical thing, but I think it's an important advantage. So in order for something to be suppressed, it has to have the potential to reveal itself. So here's sort of how I go about solving this solution. I am going to focus on the PM states like Peterson does, but I'm going to say that they're not occurrent desires. They're just what the agent experiences when their dispositional desire is being manifested. So he did say that it was PM states are a manifestation of dispositional desire. And I think we can cash out this distinction between like a desire when it's being manifested and a desire when it's not, in terms of like this active dormant distinction. So I kind of stumbled upon this view by looking into the literature on the metaphysics of emotions. So Stout in 2022 defended a view that dispositional emotion states can be active or dormant. So here's an example to do with emotion. I will argue that when you're in the grip of anger with the two boys for this is a very odd example, for the two boys for mistreating the dog, you're in the very same dispositional state you will be in later when you have cooled down and are thinking about something else, all together, though still angry with the two boys for mistreating the dog. When in the grip of anger, you're in a dispositional state that is in the process of being manifested. It's an active dispositional state. Later, you're in the same dispositional state. It may still be said of you that you are angry with the two boys, but the disposition is not being manifested. The anger is dormant. So I'm going to just take this, and he did allude to the fact it could be applied to desire. I'm going to take this, apply it to desire. A dispositional desire is active when it is being manifested, and it is dormant when it is not being manifested due to the operational conditions, like not holding. So with that in hand, I'm going to go about and deny 3 and say that when a dispositional state is active, it can provide us with privileged access to the dispositional desire. So let's go back to Gertler's claim about why we don't have privileged access to dispositional desires. Here it is again. In order to know that you're in a dispositional state of desire, you need to know that you would act in ways to bring about the content of that desire under certain conditions. And then just compare that to Peterson's definition of desire. Obviously, this isn't, she wasn't necessarily working with Peterson's conditions, so this is not necessarily against Gertler, it's more against Peterson. But yeah, Peterson says for an agent S to desire that P, is it for it to be the case that under certain conditions C, S will phi, where phi is a mental event, behaviour, action that aims to bring about that P. So she says that you need to know that you would act in ways to bring about the content of desire, but he says that you desire that P if under certain conditions you will phi, where phi is a mental event, behaviour or action that aims to bring about that P. So it feels like you need to know that you would do this, not that you would merely act in ways to bring about the content of your desire. So if you only have to know that you would phi, where phi is all these things, what's interesting is it feels like, I'll say what that says, feels like a mental event. PM states could be an example of a mental event that aims to bring about the P. And remember that PM states are just what the agent experiences when the dispositional desire is being manifested. So, okay, with that in mind, it feels like the agent just has to know that they would be in a PM state or be in this, feeling of attractiveness, pleasure, whatever. But maybe you don't need to know that you would be in that state. Maybe it's enough to know that you just are in that state. So let's go back to the gym example. So again, after finishing my run at the gym, I feel thirsty. This feeling again, the PM state, shows that the dispositional desire for water is active, and it seems that it's a suitable value for phi, as we saw down there. So to desire to drink water is just a phi when the conditions allow. My feeling of thirst is a mental event, behaviour and action that aims to bring about my drinking of water. It's a value for phi. My feeling thirsty is sufficient for my knowing that I feel thirsty. I've put stars around knowing because it's like highly epistemically secure knowledge. My feeling thirsty is sufficient for my knowing that I feel thirsty. My knowing that I feel thirsty is sufficient for my knowing that I'm in a state that aims to bring about my drinking of water. I don't know if I'm able to read this. Can I move that? I can. Brilliant. My knowing that I am phi-ing is sufficient for my knowing that I desire to drink water. So, the reason I've sort of worded this in quite a convoluted way is that I don't think it's like guaranteed that you would know it, because you sort of have to engage with those things in the right way psychologically. You sort of have to have the right concepts. For example, with number 4, it's possible that someone could feel thirsty and they might not know that they're in a state that aims to drink about their drinking of water, because they might not know what water is. Something like that. But yeah, it feels like we can get from knowing that you're feeling thirsty to knowing that you are in a state that aims to bring about your drinking of water to knowing that that you desire to drink water. Can you tell I'm unsure of this bit? Oh, there we are. So, it's not necessary to know that I would fire under certain conditions. It's enough just to know that I am firing right now. Does this solution work? There's potentially a worry that there might be an epistemic gap. So can you fire without it being the result of an underlying dispositional desire? I obviously want to say no, but I think in order to say no, I need to define desire in a little bit more of a kind of rigorous, more detailed way than maybe Peterson did. And I think the distinction between the constitutive and operational conditions is going to do some work there. But that's one worry. Someone might think that this degree of privileged access isn't satisfying, like it's not enough to hold on to that claim. We only seem to get this privileged access when the desire is active. I do wonder if how memory works with this. So once you've gained the privileged access via it being active, you can then go back and remember that phenomenological experience, and then that's enough to then get privileged access to it again, maybe. So that's potentially another worry, but I think I could probably circumvent that. And yes, are PM states suitable values for phi? I think I'm less worried about this because I think Peterson himself did say that they were manifestations of dispositional desires, so he at least thinks they are. But I might have to do a bit more work to defend why they are. But yeah, you tell me, does it work? I don't know. Yeah, I'm basically just open to any thoughts, questions, queries. Yes, it's been very much a work in progress, so yeah, I think that is... Oh, I'll do a little summary. I argue Peterson's argument for rejecting one of the desire puzzle fails. I propose a new solution in rejecting number 3. PM states can provide us with privileged access to our dispositional desires, and these states are not occurrent desires. Desires can be dormant or active, and when they're active, in the form of this PM state, we have privileged access to them. And that's me. Thank you.
Okay, let's start. So I came super unprepared, so I don't have a pencil or anything, so I just memorized all my questions. So, Eric.
So in all these discussions, I'm not quite clear what the privileged access is meant to be to. So here's one candidate, it's to the desire. Here's another candidate, it's to the content of the desire. You can be a bit more agnostic about what kind of state you're in, or what the attitude is. Or it's not clear to me that the former entails the latter, so that having access to your desire means having access to what the content of the desire is. It might be that, for example, in complicated social situations, you might get cases like this, where I am motivated to act, and I'm not really sure what the I'm aware of being motivated to act and trying to bring a certain end about, but I'm not actually sure. So I'm aware of what phi is, but I'm not actually sure what p was. Cases like that. And so on the one hand, it's kind of thrown out on the whole puzzle. I think we've got to be clear about what privileged access is. But also, if we can have these cases where we've got privileged access to the dispositional state, as to the desire, without actually having to meet that higher bar, for example, without even having to know what the content of it is, then maybe the bar for what you're doing is much lower than we might initially think, and you maybe don't even need all of this story. This will depend on what we think privileged access means.
Yeah, really good. I think that you've kind of explained why I was really struggling to get to this bit. Is that I would lose track on what actually I was trying to get us to, because there's definitely a distinction between sort of knowing that, so I think privileged access has got to be knowing that you desire P.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I don't think that has to mean that you need the concept of desire, but it has to be that you know that you... This is why I was sort of trying to tease out the concepts in, like, different ways. So, like, I think you have to know that you are in a state that aims to bring about something, like, well, it's something specific. But yeah, I did get the sense that it shouldn't have to be this hard to get to the bit I'm wanting to get to. So maybe it's just better to try to, figure out what privileged access is, and then it might be a lot easier for me. Basically, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what they're thinking of. I think they seem to be treating it as I mentioned this earlier. If in order to know that you desire that P, you have to know that you would act in ways to da-da-da-da-da. That feels like it's like the person has to know that desires are dispositional states in order to know that in some way. Because otherwise, why would you seek out that knowledge to get to know your desire? Do you know what I mean? We don't try to know things. The point is it just happens. So it can't be contingent on knowing what a dispositional is. So basically that's...
Then philosophers with faulty theories of desires wouldn't know any of their desires.
Yeah. Okay, so that's something to focus on, and that'll make that a bit easier. Cool, thank you.
Thanks. Petronella, you want to go?
Yes, I would like to go. Hi, thank you for the talk. So this is really fun because I've recently gotten into desires and stuff. Super interesting topic. So I had two quick things to say. The first thing is to recommend reading about the transparency account. So it's the sort of stuff that Lola works on, but has been developed more by Alex Byrne, who's like not a cool guy, but the philosophy is good. If you want a less controversial person, the name escapes me at the moment, but I'll send you an email. The second thing is I just sort of would. I have a slight worry, maybe clarificatory point about the sort of active, dormant, dispositional desires. It seems to sort of be getting at the same thing as dispositional occurrent. It would be good to hear a little bit more about, what's the difference between those, what sets them apart. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah. Firstly, thanks for the recommendations. I think when I was first working on this paper, when it was an MLET essay, I was reading sort of Lola, Alex Brine, and I think it will be good to go back to that starting point to figure out more about this self-knowledge and privileged access thing. It will link back to what me and Eric were trying to figure out just there. I can definitely say more about the active dormant versus dispositional occurrence stuff. So I think obviously we are there's a worry that maybe it's just a language dispute, like a verbal dispute, because we're just talking about the same thing. I'm calling it this, they're calling it that. The main reason I think that it's not just a verbal dispute is partly for the metaphysical advantages that I mentioned at the start about how if we talk about them as occurrent versus dispositional, it feels like we're counting too many desires, and we lose any sense of suppressing a desire, and it just doesn't fit with our intuitions about how we count desires. But another worry that I am sort of yet to really get into is that it's not super clear what an occurrent state is. So occurrent suggests it's a process and processes go over time. States are meant to be these more sort of static things. I'm not really as read up on the metaphysics of states and processes as I probably would need to be to talk about that much more, but I think that would also be an advantage to active dormant, because you then don't have to deal with this weird concept of an occurrent state, which I'm pretty sure Peterson does, give an account of what one might be, but it feels better to not have to do that and to just cash it out in a more intuitive way. So I think that's what I would say to that.
Nice, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks. So I want to ask about the Peterson distinction. So when you say double counting, is it something like this? So you have the what's like the background that's not currently active?
Oh, dormant.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you have the dormant desire, and then you go out throughout the world, and then the dormant desire like gives rise to a current desires. Are like distinct in some way. Is that the
So,
picture?
well, Peterson wouldn't use the dormant active
Okay.
stuff. He would say you have a dispositional desire to eat cake or something, and then when that dispositional desire is manifested, an occurrent desire is a manifestation of that dispositional desire.
So yeah, using the sort of dispositional current language then. So you've got these dispositional desires, you go around, a current desires spring out of them.
Yeah.
Under the right conditions. And your objection here is like, well, now there's no sense in which I can suppress that dispositional desire. All I can be suppressing is the occurrent desire.
Well, I don't think you are suppressing the occurrent desire, because the occurrent desire has to exist to be suppressed.
Yeah.
And the occurrent desire doesn't exist until it's occurrent. So I think that what's happening is we're going from a dispositional desire, one desire, that then becomes manifested, becomes occurrent. That occurrent desire has revealed itself, and you weren't suppressing that occurrent desire before because it didn't exist, and the dispositional desire hasn't revealed itself because it's still underlying, because the dispositional desire can't be occurrent. So this all sounds very odd, but I don't think he was going for this, but I think it just sort of falls out of the view.
But it just seems to me that you're suggesting that the occurrent desire couldn't be suppressed because it's already happened.
No, it hasn't happened yet. I mean, it depends what timeline we're thinking of. So if we take an example that I used about me we're going on a walk, and then I eventually end up at a cafe with lots of cake. So when I'm on the walk, I'm able to suppress my desire for cake. Maybe before I started the walk, I was desiring cake in the active, occurrent sense. Then I'm like, no, I need to focus on the walk. Otherwise, I'm going to just be thinking of cake the whole time. So I achieved that. I managed to suppress it during the walk. Then I go into the cafe, and the desire reveals itself again because all the cake's there and it looks great. The reason that on Peterson's view, when I was on that walk, I wasn't suppressing the desire that later reveals itself, because the desire that later reveals itself just came into an existence at that point when I saw the cake in the cafe. So,
well, I guess what I wonder is it not just enough for Peterson that this second occurrent desire could also be suppressed? It just looks like there's a meaningful sense in which it was, it's meaningfully connected to my dispositional desire. So if I suppress all the occurrent instances of the dispositional desire, then is that not a sense in which I'm also suppressing the dispositional one?
Maybe he'd want to say something like he prevented a desire being manifested. I think he wouldn't be able to talk about it being suppressed, but I think maybe there's some achievement in not manifesting a disposition, and that could maybe avoid the sort of iffy direction. And then it turns maybe into more of we can say this or we can say this. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I'll have to think about that and see if there's any kind of advantages to one or the other.
Well, I have a question about when we have privileged access to dispositional states.
Mm-hmm.
Do we really have privileged access to the dispositional states themselves? Because you said that when, for example, when a belief is dominant or it is active, the belief remains the same, right? It's the same belief. It hasn't changed. So, what makes the difference between a dominant belief or dominant desire and active desire? Must be something else rather than the desire itself. So, when we have privileged access to dispositional states, for example, when we have privileged access to an active desire, maybe we just have privileged access to some feelings accompanying with the desire itself, but not the desire. But we do not have access to the desire itself. So the third proposition of the puzzle is true, right? But the second is false. So there is still not the puzzle.
That's definitely a way. I'll go back to the puzzle. You could definitely deny 2 instead. I think to address your point about what we have privileged access to, I wouldn't say that the thing we have privileged access to is an active desire. I think that makes it sound like a bit of a Peterson view where like you've got 2 desires. I think it's just a way the desire is right now. So the desire, either a desire is being manifested or it's not, and when it's what I call active, it is being manifested. So it just so happens that we only have access to that desire when it is manifesting, because it's like that's only when it shows its head. That's when we can see it and have access to it. So I think obviously I need to figure out a bit more, and this goes back to the first point, what it means to have privileged access to, and like what it means to have privileged access to a desire, whether it's the content or the something else, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think I probably should I'll be interested to explore like what happens when we try to deny 2, but I worry about denying 2 just because it is more accepted, and like whereas I think 3 is the kind of rogue one there and has least ramifications in denying. But yeah, sorry, does that help? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to ask. What's the difference between manifest desire and dormant desire? Is this something intrinsic to desire that makes a difference?
Yeah. So the difference between, I mean, the desire is the same both times.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between it is when a desire is dormant, there's no phenomenology experienced by the agent. The thing that makes it still a desire is the fact that the constitutive conditions are in place, and if the operational conditions were to hit in, it would manifest. Problem is the operational conditions aren't in place, whereas when a desire is manifested, it is still the same desire, but it's just the environment has changed in some way and the operational conditions have cooperated and now it's being manifested, which brings with it the phenomenology. And so it's an environment and an internal thing, but I think the environment is the thing that changes first. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions?
So I still don't see the puzzle.
Oh.
Like as in, I don't think the three are perfectly consistent with one another, and they don't seem to contradict any of our experience. Like this is obviously not a problem for you, but like I'm trying to understand where we're starting from.
Well, because desires are dispositional states, we have privileged access to them, but we don't have privileged access to any dispositional states. So this contradicts that.
I mean, you could just say that the desires we have privileged access to.
The what, sorry?
Sorry, I'm thinking.
That's okay. I think you have to deny something in there for it to solve. But I don't know what. I think that one actually.
Okay. I think I was in between your answer and the first, and I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, this makes sense.
Yeah.
And I agree that you don't want to deny too.
Mm.
That's. But I think you can weaken the privileged claim sufficiently.
Yeah,
That makes the puzzle disappear. Like I think that's the.
Right. That's what we, so if these mean different things in each proposition, then it isn't a puzzle.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. So we might the way in which we might feel we have privileged access to our life might be in one sense, and the way we might feel that we don't have privileged access to dispositional states might be in another sense. And if we clarify those senses, puzzle vanishes. Which is, I guess, depending on which one you fall on, you can say that's denying that, or you can say that's denying that. But yeah, Yeah, I see what you mean
Okay,
now.
okay, okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, this helps. Thank you.
Cool. That's really good.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay, then we can just thank Evie again.